Like most people of this earth, I had always been aware of the existence of Napoleon, a man who had become the Emperor of France and to most people in the UK, the only notable French person in history. Just kidding. Through the years it stayed this way, his name never being brought up in the many history or political classes I took part in. However, it was when a trailer was released earlier this year that my interest on the man finally peaked. A trailer depicting harsh combat, a genius tactician and soldier, a man who rose from nothing to become emperor, as well as his life behind closed doors, focusing in on that of the controversial relationship with Josephine, directed by Ridley Scott and starring Joaquin Phoenix. My hype was on par with Oppenheimer, and so were everyone else's as memes began spreading around TikTok from both military and history buffs, as well as average old folk, who like me had become enamoured with his story. In the weeks following, I slowly began looking more into his life, his battles, and most importantly, his rise to power. In my head coming up with a whole host of imagery of how Ridley Scott would show the confrontations, as well as his interactions with friends, lovers, and enemies. After watching documentaries, dabbling in books, and scrolling through Wikipedia, the only question in my mind was how. How would he be able to pull this off? How would he be able to break down 30 years of a person's life into a mere 2.5 hours? As time dredged on, that thought stayed in my mind. The time came to get my seat in the cinema and sit down for this historical epic. Did I have expectations? Yes, but I wouldn't let that stop me from enjoying it, if there were only a few historical inaccuracies.
3 hours later.
I was right. I had been fooled, deceived. All of it was just a trailer for a 4-hour version releasing on Apple TV. Why did this have to happen? Not to be one of the best actors of our time, Joaquin Phoenix has shined in many performances. Films come to mind such as Gladiator or Joker, however here, I don't know what he was doing. From looking at the production, Ridley Scott mentioned he was interested in Phoenix from Joker, so it's more than a mere guess he told Phoenix to act that way, as he has all the charisma of an anxious schoolboy, as well as being the epitome of short man syndrome. His insecurities forever at the forefront of the movie, never being able to fully show his calm and collected side, his planning and greatness as a tacticianer. It failed to present the man who was at the time supposed to be the best soldier ever born on this earth. Even though the movie is portrayed as peeling back the layers of a hard exterior to show the delicate heart and mind of the man beneath, there never feels like a layer is being peeled back as the delicate character on display is always being shown. That character is a wet wipe, a man-child, someone who the further you get into the film, the more you question how he's been able to consolidate so much power.
What are you?
An idiot sandwich.
You know from history it makes sense, as you know Napoleon was the Emperor of France, but the film rushes over his rise to power so much that you never feel that weight, never feel why the French come to like him, love him, and accept him as their emperor. Speaking of history, historical accuracy, the phrase that gets beaten around the bush more than anything else when it comes to historical films. Some think it's needless and doesn't need to be included. Some people think a movie based on history should have to follow the history to the T. I fall in the middle and oftentimes don't mind historical inaccuracy, as long as it services the narrative being told to us and doesn't completely fuck up with the timeline. However, for this film, the latter is most definitely true. A rearranging of the timeline, complete lack of mention of key events, characters being cut out of the film, or only being shown for one scene. To delve back into my last point though, getting at history, Napoleon really became a French hero after his campaign in Italy, where he was able to strengthen the resolve of a broken army, fight against the Allied coalition and take the country. This was seen as a major win for France at the time, which was still on the verge of anarchy and civil unrest, but it showed people that there were still capable generals in the military that could lead their country out of this dark period. In the movie, however, this campaign is completely skipped over. We just see the siege of Toulon, a royalist uprising in Paris, and then Napoleon in Egypt. When characters say to him that the only thing French people can agree on is "You are Caesar," that weight is again not felt, as we haven't had the time to let that rise sink in, or even see the people's reactions. Considering this is a man who would walk around Paris in disguise to hear what the people were thinking about him, it would have been an interesting way to get the civilian perspective. One of the first lessons you will receive in a film studies class is show not tell, and unfortunately it just isn't true here. Nothing is shown, and everything is told. Victory at Toulon seems more like luck than a decisive planned-out win. His retreat in Egypt is played off in the movie as a man who is so insecure with his wife's actions, he'll leave his entire army just to lecture her. The only time you get a glimpse at the leader, the general, and the tactician is at the Battle of Austerlitz, touted as Napoleon's magnum opus, and in the film, whilst being portrayed as woefully inaccurate, but within the context of the film, shows what he is capable of, the furiosity of a man who can decimate entire armies with skill and wisdom. After this though, the film returns to telling, not showing. In Russia we see a few shots of the Battle of Borodino, just to cut away to Napoleon writing a letter saying, "I won a great battle today." His retreat from Russia is merely glossed over, completely skipping over the campaign of 1813 and the campaign of France in 1814, which is the real reason Napoleon was exiled, as the coalition was nearing Paris itself. Even when he comes back and his troops fall back to his side, there is no weight to it. Frankly, Phoenix's performance in the scene makes him look like he was relieved not to get shot more than anything. Comparing all this to the 1970 film Waterloo, we see a completely different man, one with unwavering confidence and a charismatic voice, a man who not even for a second doubts that the soldiers will not fall to his side. I mean, how ballsy have you got to be to tell a whole corps of infantry to fire on you knowing they won't? In real life, Napoleon walked up to the fifth and shouted, "If there is one among you who wishes to kill his general, his emperor, here I am." It's supposed to be electrifying, full of hope as we believe he is taking back the throne. The more I look deeper into this film, the more I believe it is just a comedy. I was told by friends if I viewed it as such I'd enjoy it more. Ridley Scott said the same. So why was it marketed as something different, something real, a retelling of the man in a serious manner? Historical inaccuracy is fine as long as you can state beforehand the film is not based in historic truth. No film should be held to the same standards if the history it's showing is based more on subversion and comedy rather than being true accounts of the events and going-ons of said person. This is why people never rile up at films like Blackadder or The Death of Stalin, as even though they are based on history, the comedy is placed at the forefront around the events of the historic backdrop it's portraying. The main focus of the film goes to Napoleon's marriage with his first wife Josephine. Whilst Vanessa Kirby does a great job and probably has the best performance in the film, their relationship is jarring at most times and cringe in others. Whilst Kirby delivers a woman who toes the line between subservient and dominant, depending on the situation, showing fleeting signs of love whilst maintaining this emotional look. In certain scenes this works well against Phoenix's obsessive Napoleon. In others, such as the love scenes, it makes it almost unwatchable. Napoleon making a whole host of animal sounds to alert Josephine to his needs is something I didn't expect to see, and not glad I did. Whilst the romance takes up the majority of anything, it toes the line between fact and fiction at almost every scene. It pulls back the layers, the two switching with one another are acting like children. There is never any growth between the two characters, and even though the film takes place over 30 years, you never feel them age or change in their behaviour. Until the end of the film, Napoleon still feels like the same person at the start, still this rash and emotional child. He's just more somber and looks like he needs to rest by the end. Even the scene where he finds out about Josephine's death still feels somehow subdued, and in context with the story it feels like there should be more of an emotional response. Napoleon's marriage to Mary Louise is nothing more than a MacGuffin to give him his first child, so we can show Josephine and afterwards she's never shown again. It's not enjoyable, oftentimes tiring, and feels incoherent. Maybe this was the intention, and from interviews it seems this way, but in context to the film it adds to the jarriness. Maybe it's because I didn't want to sit through hours of raunchy and dishevelled romance, or maybe it's because I knew Napoleon was so much more than the man portrayed on screen. But in a film called Napoleon, it never felt like he had a true grasp as the lead. It felt like he was being led, being placed in situations and without knowing what to do, always being commanded or told what to do by someone else. Maybe he was like this in real life, we'll never really know, but he was never like this in his political career and warfare, with rewrites coming from Phoenix and Scott weeks before shooting, due to not understanding how he should play the character. It seems Phoenix acts from scene to scene more than being a cohesive character. Whilst this fits roles such as Joker, for a man like Napoleon the same effect doesn't work. I don't think Phoenix was a miscast, as I know he has the ability to be a great Napoleon, as bits of that genius were shown throughout the film, but I don't think the script worked to his strengths as an actor. Whilst Phoenix has said in interviews the qualities he portrayed in the film were qualities he read about in his research for the character, it isn't qualities he had in all aspects of his life. If anything, the film makes me want to read more into his love and social life, to see if these qualities are true. as well as his battles and life as a general. I think that's the one true praise I can give the film, is that it makes me want to read up on the history more, and that's always a trait of a successful biopic or historical epic. Whether out of confusion, wanting to read more, study battles or characters, or life at the time, whether it's to see the real story or elevate your understanding of the media you watch, it is never a bad thing that a piece of media makes you want to educate yourself. Aside from this, the cinematography throughout is beautiful and brings you back to the era alongside the set designs. If one thing could be said, it's that the drip is immaculate. When Napoleon walks around in his uniform, it does feel powerful. Its presence is commanding, and so too is that of the hat, marred in history forever as the headwear of one of the greatest military leaders in history. In closing, whilst I personally have my biases against the film, I still think it's worth the watch for people that want to see a more nuanced and comedic take on the life of Napoleon. If you want to see his military career in more depth, start with Waterloo and work your way through. Study the man, watch documentaries and read some books. As long as people remain interested in these kinds of media pieces, we shall continue to get historical epics, biopics, all on the same scale as this film. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, if not, a dislike. Be sure to tell me your thoughts on the movie in the comments below, and remember, have a good afternoon, good evening, and good night.